Greetings, shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Editor's Note, and I'm Jonathan Hessen. And in today's edition, we're going to focus on a whole variety of issues that are very relevant for today, the various implications for the region. To do just that, I have the pleasure of introducing a dear friend, colleague, mentor, Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Kuperwasser, the president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, formerly served in a whole host of very important positions, to include the Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, head of the IDF Intelligence Directorate's Research and Assessment Division, and more and more and more. But with that, it's a pleasure having you, sir.
It's a pleasure for me to be with you, Jonathan.
Well, I'd like to start with actually the main event, if I may call it that, of the day, the meeting between President Donald Trump and the de facto president of Damascus currently, since he doesn't control all of Syria, but a first such visit with a Syrian president in history.
Well, I think that this is, you cannot underestimate the importance of this meeting. We look at it most of the time as how come that the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, is going to meet somebody who's until recently has been a terrorist and had a price over his head and represents a very radical jihadist organization. So we are all astonished to see that happening, and this was the trend ever since he took office in Damascus, after his successful attempt to throw the former regime of Syria. But at the same time, one can look at it and say to himself, how come that the leader of a jihadic organization that was determined to destroy the United States and Israel is ready to go to Washington and be a guest of the leader of the corrupt West that is facing the Islam and trying to weaken it and prevent it from being the religion of the entire world and so on and so forth.
Which is the Islamist narrative.
Which is the Islamist narrative that he was committed to until no time at all passed. And this is really a very surprising event that tells us that we are already not in the stage of the war that we have been fighting for the last 2 years. We are in the stage of the aftermath. Mm-hmm. And in this aftermath, everybody is trying to position himself in the best position that he can. And the United States has a very big asset, its relations with Israel, and the success of the joint effort to shape the Middle East that Israel took most of the burden of, and the United States joined in and helped us do that. And in this aftermath, we are facing two major meetings. The meeting with President Shara, that is going to determine what's going to happen in Syria and how this future was going to serve the interests of the United States first and foremost, the interest of Shara, who wants legitimacy, international legitimacy, and needs the help of the international community led by the United States in order to reconstruct and rehabilitate the broken country that he's in charge of. And the second meeting is going to be the meeting next week between President Trump and the Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. That's going to also determine how are we going in the Middle East in the coming future. And everybody wants to see the war over, even though the war is not over. Everybody wants to believe that the war is over and focus on the aftermath.
Right.
And the future of the relationships between Israel and Syria, the future of the relationship between Israel and the United States and Turkey are going to all be determined by the outcome of this meeting today of President Shara and President Trump. And we all hope that the friendship and the joint common interest that we have with the Americans would lead us to a positive result of this meeting that would mean that the commitment to reconstruct Syria will be accompanied by understanding between Israel and Syria and the United States about the relationship between the three that would guarantee that Syria will not pose in the future a threat to Israel, no deployment of forces in the southern part of Syria, that Syria will not be used anymore as a route through which Iran can arm Hezbollah, because we know that one of the major concerns in the aftermath is the ongoing effort of Hezbollah to rearm that is being fed by probably still shipments of arms through Syria to Lebanon. It's unbelievable. I'm sure that Shah is not in favor of that, but he's not doing enough in order to prevent it from happening, because, as you said, it doesn't really rule all of Syria. And so this has to be dealt with, and by some arrangement that would guarantee that Israel can make sure that the Druze living in the southern part of Syria and the Jabal Druze, the Sueda area, are protected and safe and do not have to worry about their survival. And if all of these points are going to be met in this meeting, and they are probably going to head, and of course I forgot to mention one other point, which is the role of Turkey in all of that. If all these points are going to be...
Which, from Israel's perspective, happens to be the most important point.
A very important point. All of these points are important.
Naturally.
All of these points are important. If this is all going to be discussed and reaching some positive result, then this is going to be a very important meeting in determining the future of the Middle East, because this can be... Nobody knows where the next step of enlarging the peace process is going to be held. We were used to speak about Saudi Arabia in the past, but I'm not sure that this is going to be really the case. It can happen
they're
in
talking
Syria.
already about Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan is a sideshow.
Yeah. Well, I'm somewhat skeptical about Syria, to be quite honest. I think the capacity to really maneuver into greener pastures is still somewhat a way off. It may be a cold relationship. The United States does view the expansion of the Abraham Accords an American national security interest, since it's not naturally about Israel. Many people don't realize this, but it is about America's security infrastructure and prosperity infrastructure that it wants to erect throughout the Middle East to push back on the Iranian Road and Belt Initiative as part of the strategic power competition. Chinese, excuse me. And naturally, there is a very significant role that Israel is playing here as a very close ally on multiple levels of the United States, which is present in the Middle East. But nonetheless, the Americans understand that the expansion of the Abraham Accords is first and foremost its own interest.
For sure. I think that we have common interest with the United States in expanding the Abraham Accord and turning the Middle East into a quieter place, more stable, more prosperous, and under American hegemony. That's what Israel and the United States want. And the fact that this jihadist is visiting the White House is definitely a move in this direction. And I just hope that they are going to find common understandings on those four issues that we were talking about. And I'm not speaking yet about, I don't think anybody speaks at this point on turning Syria into a partner of the Abraham Accords at this stage. This is not the case. But some security understandings and other agreements regarding issues that are that are important for Israel and for the United States, this is good enough at this stage. Who knows? Maybe in the future this may develop into something that can lead us to normal relations and other areas. We can help a lot the Syrians when it comes to technology, when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to other things that are important to Syria. If they understand that we can move in this direction, we are not yet there. This can happen in the future.
Just to take into context, there is currently a drought of biblical magnitude raging throughout the region, not only in Syria, Israel, and adjacent countries, but also in Iran,
Of course.
where we're hearing the president, Masoud Pezeshkian, coming out and stating, unless rain is going to fall upon the Iranian capital, they'll be forced to evacuate all the residents of this 10 million residents. It's unbelievable. But
it's not only Tehran, it's other areas of...
But from an Israeli perspective, if you really look at the drought impacting significantly the adjacent countries, those who have relations with Israel are benefiting.
Of course, Jordan.
Jordan particularly is gaining more than triple of the peace accords that were signed, talking about quantities of cubic meters of water in the millions.
Because Israel can desalinate water, it is in a totally different situation. It's not dependent only on rain. And this is unbelievable situation because we were always under the impression that Israel is getting drier and drier, and what's going to happen if there's not going to be rain. Today we do not depend on rain.
Which is amazing, to say the least. Another point that I think that is very important, obviously this can help the Syrians, but it doesn't stop there. It's beyond the scope of rain. It's naturally a lot of agriculture. They are heavily dependent on agriculture. And being able to do that would ultimately also diminish the dependence on Russia, which is heavily, Damascus is heavily reliant on Moscow in light of the fact that the majority of its grain and wheat and everything to do with that emanates from Russia.
Yeah.
Right? So according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, I've stated this already on air once, 2.15 million tons of wheat need to be imported by the end of 2026 to be able to feed the 16 million residents of Syria.
They can bring it from the United States as well.
Well, they could, but it's not the case at this point in time.
I think, but at this point, the Americans don't want to cause a rift between the Syrians and the Russians. It's not on their list. They have enough issues when it comes to Syria. This is not one of them. Everybody is fine with the Russian forces staying in Hamimim and in...
also for the Americans?
I think even the Americans don't put that high on the list of requests from the Syrians.
Because in the hearing of sorry that I interject, in the hearing of Marco Rubio, the reasoning that was stated about the necessity to lift the sanctions, the Caesar Act, from the Syrians emanated from the fact that this would diminish the reliance on Russia. And that is something that the Americans want to happen.
Of course, but I don't think that they are now pushing in the Syrians to tell the Russians to leave Syria. This is not the issue right now. They don't want them to get even more dependent on Russia. But they don't try to turn this into an issue.
Well, let's touch base on the Saudi angle, since the Saudis are expected to have their meeting at the White House. Obviously, as you mentioned, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will meet with President Donald Trump. And this meeting is quite significant. But it comes at a time when the Saudis are for some reason under the impression that normalizing their relations with Israel is merely a one-way street when it comes to benefiting Israel rather than themselves. Why is that?
Well, I think that the Saudis believe that they can get what they want from the United States without moving towards normalization. I think it's extremely important that the United States understand that normalization is an American interest and that they should condition giving the Saudis all kinds of goods and developments that serve their interests on moving towards normalization. That's because it's a golden time to shape the future of the Middle East.
But hasn't the Trump administration changed that equation during the visit that President Trump held a couple months ago?
Well, probably not enough, because we see that the Saudis do not want to move forward unless there is readiness on behalf of Israel to move towards two-state solution and all of that. Now, Israel, and I hope the Americans are going to use it because they have inserted this language into this
21-point plan.
21-point plan. The language says that after reforms of the Palestinian Authority, which even though Abu Mazen tries to convince everybody that he has done reforms, he hasn't. But after reforms of the Palestinian Authority, there can be a path towards self-determination of the Palestinians that can take the shape of statehood that we believe is the aspiration of the Palestinians. Well, this is not the aspiration of the Palestinians, and they have not done the reforms. And if, you can speak about self-determination, but the statehood is still far away. But nevertheless, Israel has accepted this language. It's in the plan that Israel supports. And this can be used as a hinge to cling to in order to move forward towards normalization, because this pathway was the language that the Saudis were looking for in the past. I believe that the Americans should insist with the Saudis and say, this is what you asked for. We managed to put it in the language of the plan. The Israelis are ready to accept it. Let's move forward. And I think this is going to be a major issue in this discussion between MBS and Trump. I hope that the Americans are going to be strong enough in order to convince them that this is the case and not give them everything they want, like new weapons, including the F-35 and all kinds of access to nuclear technology without getting in return something on normalization. This is extremely important. I always say that you can do a little bit less than full normalization. We can move towards integration of the Saudi economy with the Israeli economy. We can improve security cooperation. We can...
Which is a Saudi interest.
Of course. All of these things are Saudi interests,
exactly.
more than Israeli interests. For Israel, normal relations with Saudi Arabia is a very nice thing to have, but it's not existential.
Right.
For Saudis that want to see their path towards prosperity accelerated, cooperation with Israel is a major building block in this new situation.
So, one of the things that really caught my attention in this context, because the wording, as was stated in the President Trump's 21-point plan, and when you go into the CMCC facilities in Kiryat Gat, where they're preparing the enforcement mechanism for the 21-point plan in Gaza, you see it on the wall, the 21-point plans. And so everybody gets the full picture, right, of what actually is the substance of this important vision, so to speak, since it is a vision rather than concrete guidelines. But if you see really within that context the full framework, it's not about granting the Palestinian statehood, it's about recognizing their aspiration for statehood, and within that context, pledging to establish a political process that would bring about a political resolution to the conflict. So it's worded in a way that was palatable for Israel, since Israel's population is not in a position, especially not after October 7th, and the massacre that was committed by Palestinians against Israelis.
From a territory that was, in fact,
de facto Palestinian
state.
Right. So that is something that needs to be taken into account. But at the same time, it does make that overture towards the Saudis that would allow them, were they to be convinced that this process would go unhindered, that it would actually materialize into a framework of the Abraham Accords in one way or another. But under my impression is that the Saudis are not certain that the war has ended.
The war is not ended.
No, I agree. But they don't believe that this ceasefire will hold. The question is, what needs to be done in order to convince them that irrespective on reality, very much like the Emiratis and the Bahrainis, but particularly the Emiratis, regardless of reality on the ground, the accords are a Catholic marriage, so to speak, where you don't join whenever it's convenient and then depart whenever it's not.
Look, the way to convince everybody that this plan is going to be materialized beyond just returning the hostages is to make sure that Hamas is ready to disarm. Or if not, to give Israel the green light it needs in order to take care of Hamas and disarm them by force. That is the key issue that will determine whether everybody is going to be convinced that they can move forward. And unless this is being done, and fully understand, I just heard today that the Emiratis are saying that they are not going to send soldiers to the
Right.
international stabilization force. And I guess nobody else is going to send any forces to this force before they know that Hamas is ready, because everybody is going to be ready to participate in peacekeeping force. But nobody is going to be involved in a peace enforcing force, because they don't have the capability to enforce, and nobody expects them to do that. It's really
Nobody
strange.
wants to fight.
Nobody wants to fight, and everybody understands that if you're going to fight Hamas on their own territory, it's going to come with casualties, and it's going to be difficult. And even if the Hamas disarms, there's still a lot of issues. As you said, this is general vision. Maybe it's a little bit more than just a general vision. It has some guidelines. But to translate the guidelines into realities, there's still a long way to go. Right. I'll just give you an example. Suppose Hamas has disarmed, which I doubt is going to happen, but suppose it did. And there is the ISF, that is running the security matters inside Gaza. And all of a sudden, there's a new organization, not Hamas, Mamas, whatever, that starts to acquire arms and plan to carry out an attack. And we give this information to the ISF because we have the capabilities to collect the information better than anybody else. So we tell the ISF, look, there's in Shasha'iyah, there's a group planning to carry out an attack. What are they going to do with it? Are they going to forcefully disarm them?
So in Judea and Samaria, the Palestinian Authority basically asks Israel to deal with those issues, which is the facts on the ground, right?
We don't ask, but we do that.
Well, yes, there's a coordination mechanism of sorts. Yeah. In southern Lebanon, as opposed to Gaza, where Israel has stated, Turkey is not going to be part of it, Turkey has been part of the interim force since the 80s, was it? Where this interim peacekeeping force was established, and more than 30, 40 years later, kept on going. Today, it's, of course, in its last year. But at the same time, we do need to take into consideration the fact that UNIFIL has been a disaster. In all, military terms and criteria, it has not fulfilled the mandate it granted to it from the get-go, irrespective of what amendments were attached to the various resolutions passed at the Security Council. Every year it failed miserably in enforcing the
didn't fulfill its mission.
Its missions, right. And ultimately, right now, when we're looking at the situation in Lebanon, there is no enforcement mechanism, and the government itself is not able to fulfill its obligations under the cessation of hostilities. Just over the weekend, we saw two senior American officials, to include the Undersecretary of the Treasury for Intelligence and Illicit Funds from the Treasury Department, and the Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, visiting with President Aoun, who happened to be a student of Gorka years past. And they were talking about the enforcement mechanism and other challenges to do with this Iranian proxy, Hezbollah. But everybody understands that unless there's going to be a concrete and deliberate effort by the government to bring about a resolution to this issue, Lebanese sovereignty is going to be obsolete. And as a matter of fact, Lebanon is stateless. So in what context, now that we do see an increase of hostilities between Hezbollah and Israel, rather Israel versus Hezbollah, and the enforcement mechanism of the cessation of hostilities that was reached on the 27th of November of last year, not erupt into a new cycle of violence that is going to include a lot of bombardments. I mean, more than 620 since the ceasefire took effect to date. Is this just going to perpetually recur time and again until the Lord knows when?
Well, first of all, there's a possibility that it's going to continue for quite a while. It's not necessarily in the interest of anybody to escalate it to the level of full confrontation. But we have to be prepared also for this eventuality, because the Lebanese government, with all the pressure coming from the United States, is not doing what it is supposed to do. It's Hezbollah doesn't feel under enough pressure to disarm itself, to accept the pressure and disarm itself. The Iranians managed somehow to keep supplying weapons to Hezbollah and to make sure that it has enough funds. And the Lebanese government is helpless in doing anything about it. They did endorse the plan of the military to disarm Hezbollah, but they didn't give them the green light to do it. So we are stuck there, and Israel has to keep mounting more and more attacks against Hezbollah's infrastructure, both in the south and beyond. And it all depends on the point in which Hezbollah is going to decide, enough is enough, we are going to retaliate.
Right.
This can happen at any given moment.
Yep.
So we are we are not going to escalate it to that level in my mind, but Hezbollah might decide at a certain point that they cannot go on like that, and they might try to retaliate.
They don't want to enter into that reality because they know also that the consequences
Of
such action would be devastating for them and may diminish their power to a point of no return, where the other forces in Lebanon could exploit that to their advantage. But all of that, we could continue talking about this for hours on end. We should also add the Iranian angle that is very, very significant. And the war is not over when it comes to the Iranians. They're not remorseful to their actions and are very keen on seeing their military capabilities evolve into a point where they could utilize them for their own interests.
Rebuilding their capabilities.
Absolutely. But all of that will have to wait for another session. General Kuperwasser, thank you very much for all of your insights.
Thank you, General.
I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a good day.